you to Durham University for this lecture that Ian Marchant is about to give. My name is Richard Davis, and I was formerly the director of Durham Energy Institute. I now have a slightly different role in the university, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Durham University and to this lecture. We've had a number of lectures over the last few years about this fantastic question of life after oil. What will happen? What does the future look like? And everyone knows that energy comes up in the news on a daily, and if not daily, a weekly basis. So it's a fantastically interesting topic. There isn't any fire alarms planned for this evening, so if there is an alarm, we need to exit the lecture from the back or the back or the front of this room, go down the stairs, don't use the lift, and exit the building. So if there is an alarm, it's the real thing, and we need to exit in an orderly fashion. Well, it's a delight to welcome you here and to welcome Professor Ian Marchant, who was formerly Chief Executive of Scottish and Southern Energy, which is one of the UK's leading utility companies, and also one of Scotland's largest industrial companies. And he led that company for over 10 years. He stepped down recently in 2013 and now has a number of other roles, and I'll just give you an indication of those sorts of roles. So he's chairman of Infinis Energy plc, which is a renewable energy company, which is about to be launched on the UK Stock Exchange. He's also chair of the Wood Group, which is an oil and gas service company, which works in a completely different part of the energy industry. He's chairman of Scotland's 2020 Climate Change Delivery Group. He's president of the UK's Energy Institute, and he's also chair of Maggie's Cancer Charity. So he has a number of roles. He's a very well-known figure in the energy scene in the UK. It's a pleasure to welcome Professor Ian Marchant.
Thank you, Richard. And your introduction about thinking about life after oil and what happens when we have no energy is somehow so appropriate because the batteries in the mic were completely flat. So if you can't hear me at the back, you need to let me know. But I told off for shouting too much at home, so I'll probably manage. One thing that Richard didn't mention in his introduction is that I was also an undergraduate at this university. So it's great for me to be back in a place that it's still very special to me indeed. What I'm going to do is spend a bit of time giving you personal reflections on the energy industry as I've seen it in the 25 years I've been involved, and as I see it now and some of the challenges. And some of what I say will be provocative, I suspect. Because actually when I look, I'm reminded of a quote from Sir Winston Churchill, which is the further back I look, the further forward I see. And I have had the advantage of 25 years in this industry, which allows me to look back. So it was roughly 25 years ago, almost today, that I started in the energy industry. Now, for those of you who are old like me, you can sort of vaguely remember 1989. It had a different look and feel. Politics was quite different. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and she said she was going to go on and on. The Soviet Union, whilst it was restructuring, was still hiding behind its wall. Within 2 years, Thatcher and the Soviet Union had both disappeared from frontline politics. The technology that we just take for granted today was only emerging. Mobile phone, the first mobile phone was sold commercially in the UK in 1985. Now, for those of you young, there was life before the mobile phone. Now, we all have them. Completely ubiquitous, but it's in a 25-year period that's happened. The internet was coming of age. I was interested for it. It was actually 1988, the year before. That was the first ever commercial email service. Now, every day on this planet, we send 200 billion emails. It's a completely different world. And, of course, the music was different in 1989. Now, I like to think of, when I'm young, that was the golden age of music. But you actually look at who was number one in 1989? Well, it was Jason and Kylie. They actually, between them, had 4 number one hits in 1989. So maybe actually it wasn't as good as one thinks. But actually the industry that I work in was also completely different. Particularly the electricity sector, because that's where I started out. In 1989, the electricity sector was owned by the government. And the names that you would have heard would be the Central Electricity Generating Board owned the power stations. In this part of the country, it would be the North East Electricity Board, NEEB. Southern Electricity Board, where I was from, or the Scottish Hydroelectric Board. And actually, privatisation was launched in 1988 with a white paper. And I spent 2 years on secondment at the Department of Energy working on this privatisation. But at that point, the industry was bureaucratic, complacent, not commercial. It had no concept of generation, retail, networks. It was electricity. So we had this white paper that was, if you like, the birth of the industry. And what I've identified in my 25 years, 4 phases of that industry's life. I'm just going to briefly explain what I mean by those 4 phases. First phase I've called childhood. And this is the phase 1990 to 94. The various companies had to establish their own identities, but they had lots of brothers and sisters. So it was difficult. Some companies cut costs, others increased them. There was a very strange attitude to competition. I can remember as a fairly young member of the industry, one board meeting you're asked, what are we doing to prepare for competition? We're worried about all these customers leaving. The next board meeting, why are we wasting money getting ready for competition? Is not going to happen. The industry couldn't work out what was going on. And the industry was ignored by the media, the politicians. The old Department of Energy was abolished. Those were the days. Energy was unimportant. So that's a blissful childhood. But teenage years kicked in. And it's interesting in this industry, you can actually date when the teenage hormones kicked in like that. It was the 14th of December, 1994. Trafalgar House bid for the company here, Northern Electric. And that launched a whole raft of things. And I can remember sometime in late 95, a director of the company I worked for was asked about mergers and acquisitions. And he said it was like being a girl at a school disco waiting to be asked to dance. We had hostile bids, we had competing bids, we had scorched earth defences, foreign takeovers, JV bids, demergers, and even one genuine merger. It was an industry feasted on by jackals and hyenas from investment banking. Now, we saw an emergence of new shapes of industries. I've just attempted to show on this graph how the industry has evolved in structure. And you see different names of different things. But in this teenage period of sort of the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, we saw vertical integration coming, owning companies, owning customers and generation. We saw gas-fired power stations being built. We saw regulatory asset bases being used as a variation for networks. We actually saw the emergence of competition, which we weren't expecting. And we saw this evolution of market structures. Now, I worked in the industry throughout these teenage years, and I have to say it was a lot of fun. There was always something going on. And as a young accountant, corporate financier, Life was interesting. But we grow up, don't we? We become young adults. And young adults find themselves with new responsibilities, new pressures. Now, for most people, as they become young adults, there are three pressures: a job, a mortgage, and children. Now, the industry that I work in, face three pressures. Now, some people call this the trilemma, but actually they're just three pressures on the industry, and it all started to come together around 2005-6. They started to matter. The first is decarbonisation. If I had stood here about 12, 13 years ago and talked about climate change and carbon emissions, many of you wouldn't have known what I was talking about. You wouldn't have heard of it. Some of you would, but most of you wouldn't. But actually, in this period of 2004 to about 8, it started to become centre stage in the energy industry, because the industry has been the major beneficiary of carbon not having a price over the last 300 years. And therefore, it's most challenged by carbon being a scarce resource. The ability to emit carbon being a scarce resource. So that's the first pressure that's emerging on this industry. The second is prices stopped falling. For the first 10 years after privatisation, basically energy prices fell virtually every year. They started to go up for all sorts of reasons. I'll come on a bit more to that later. But suddenly affordability starts to become an issue. Fuel poverty numbers, instead of going down, start to go back up. And then we get security supply, the third pressure. We stop being completely dependent on our own gas reserves, and we start to have to import gas. And plants that we built in the 60s and 70s start to close. So the industry's under a lot of pressure here in all three areas. And then we're struggling as an industry, and bang, you get the financial crisis that hit every sector. And that was a very difficult period. Late 2008, 2009, as a chief executive of a large company, that was a very, very difficult period to run any business in. And you've got these three pressures going on. As a result of all that, the politicians woke up and remembered the energy industry. And we've come under more and more scrutiny. So what happens as a consequence of all that pressure and all that scrutiny is we enter the fourth phase of an industry's life. The phase I believe we're in now, the midlife crisis. And if only it was a story of which sports car that we bought. I'm afraid not that happy. I think there are 5 particular problems with the industry today, and I'm going to look at each of them, spending a bit more time on the first 2 and then rattling through the other 3. Because I think the prognosis for the future of the industry lies in these areas. As I said, one of the things that happened in the young adult phase was the increased politicisation. So we've become a very political industry. I just have to say with this photograph, it took me a lot longer to find a photograph of Alex Salmond looking confused and perplexed than the other 3. but that's an aside. Now, the energy sector's seen an enormous amount of political intervention. Virtually every year, we've had a new bill going through Parliament. And that intervention has generally been piecemeal and disjointed. We are a long-term industry, and I find it incredible that in my 11 years, nearly 11 years as the chief executive, I had to deal with 11 ministers of state for energy. Now, if a quoted company changed its management that often, you'd get a hostile takeover. Now, we've seen the industry become a party political football. Announcements of policy intentions at Prime Minister's questions and in party conferences, they're not good platforms for making sound and sensible policy. It leads to fragmented interventions that just ignore the interconnectedness of everything in energy. I'm not sure interconnectedness is a word, but it describes the energy system. You do one thing here and something happens somewhere else. Now, the government would argue that its latest package, something called the electricity market reform, is comprehensive. But I believe it still suffers from a number of serious flaws, and they mainly flow from the same root that's undermined policy efforts in the last few years. We do not have an agreed and basic political philosophy of how we want our energy industry to be organised. And exactly the same charge can be levelled at the Labour Party policy of an arbitrary retail price freeze. So let me explain what I mean. From 1947 until around 1988, it was accepted the state would own the industry. It would be funded and run effectively as part of the political machine. Then from about the late 80s until around 2005-06, the accepted wisdom was that the state would leave well alone. It would rely on independent regulation to deal with natural monopolies like networks, and it would need competition and market forces to deal with the rest. However, more recently, the state has added more and more distortions to the operation of the market, and regulators have added complexity after complexity to price controls. The list of distortions in the market grows longer seemingly by the day, and their structure changes every 5 years or so, and the detail gets flexed. I mean, you look at how many consultations come out of DEC and Ofgem on a weekly basis, and you will know what I mean. And that brings us back to EMR. Now, EMR purports to be market friendly, and yet it's one of the most interventionist pieces of legislation I've ever seen. Those who don't understand the reference in the slide, that's all the EMR documents, and that's the Soviet Union 5-year plan. This raft of legislation that is now on the statute book gives the Secretary of State for Energy around 50 different powers to intervene in the affairs of the electricity industry. It allows government to decide what gets built, with what technology, by whom, where and when. Some interventions are solely designed to be used if the first intervention doesn't work, or actually doesn't produce the outcome that government wants. Government doesn't actually say what outcome it does want. It's the pretense it's a piece of legislation to make the market work better, but it means that we're not having the right debates. For example, I think we should be asking, does government need all the powers it's taking? Does it have the competence and resources to make the decisions it's setting aside for itself? Are the governance checks and balances appropriate? And are the monitoring and reporting arrangements clear and fit for purpose? Now, I happen to believe the answer to those 4 questions is no, 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 and no. But actually, my main point is that we aren't having that debate. We are debating very detailed things about refinancing clauses in things like contracts for differences and auction design rules for capacity markets. So, as a result, we're relying on government picking winners, even though we say, and they say, that politicians should never do that. We're driving through measures that will reduce long-term liquidity in the wholesale electricity markets when we say it needs to increase. We think that gas-fired generation will have a key role in the transition to a low-carbon economy, but we aren't considering the interplay between gas and electricity. We are rightly concerned about fuel poverty, but we seem unable to make the connection about increasing costs to the industry and the prices that customers have to pay. We say this edifice isn't all around nuclear, But actually it is. It's simply to make nuclear bankable. So, I'm not a big fan of EMR, as you can probably tell. But I'm apolitical, because I'm not a big fan of Labour's policy either. Because if I look at the issues from the Labour policy, there's a lack of underlying political philosophy. So there's a populist retail price freeze put forward on the argument that it will make the market better. And it simultaneously undermines that market. Why do I say that? Well, the headline policy is directed at retail prices. And I can see three problems with that. Firstly, it seeks control of the end user price of a commodity without doing anything about the underlying costs. And that leaves the retailers at the mercy of trends outside their control. Now, we're all obviously concerned about high energy prices. But I think that the retailer's fairly low margins is missing the target. By my reckoning, over the last few years, retail margins have been around the fifth biggest contributor to rising energy prices. First, they rank behind global and well-documented rising wholesale energy prices. Secondly, they rank below increasing network charges. Third, they rank below the relentless rise in government-imposed costs for clean energy and energy efficiency. And fourth, they rank behind the overhead pressures on things like supplies for smart metering and the Green Deal. But all the ire is focused on the margin. Second reason, price freezes don't work. I studied them as an undergraduate economist here in 1980-something, looking at what happened in the 70s. They don't work. They produce distortions in the market, create suboptimal behaviours, and actually only delay the inevitable. King Canute springs to mind. And they're actually notoriously difficult to actually implement. Third problem, the price freeze, is whatever politicians may think and assert, there is, and always has been, a link between levels of investment on one hand and levels of profitability on the other. If politicians think they'll get the investment needed to largely decarbonise the UK's electricity system by 2030, and at the same time drive a segment of the industry into loss, they operate on a different planet to the one I live on. The businesses of the production and supply of energy are largely owned by the same companies. They're certainly financed by the same investors. Politicians don't understand that confidence is a fragile thing. And the rhetoric coming out of the UK will have undermined confidence throughout boardrooms in Europe. So politicians of all persuasions have reached for interventions without considering the impact on other interventions, without considering the impact on other parts of the industry, or without thinking about the long-term future of the energy industry. So we need a high-level, grown-up debate about whether we want a fully and independently regulated market or one driven by market forces. Let me be clear, there's two basic extremes, I believe. A fully regulated market, properly done, or one where you create a framework and you leave the market to deliver. Both of those solutions can be made to work. But living in the twilight zone in the middle is really dangerous. We currently have a multitude of interventions masquerading as one thing or being driven by short-term politics. That is a recipe for a crisis. And that will be far more serious than the inactivity we currently see. So my basic plea is let's decide regulation on markets and make those work. Let's not stay in this muddle in the middle. Now, one of the consequences of all that criticism and all the rhetoric is, so one thing it doesn't do, it doesn't keep the lights on. What keeps the lights on is power stations. Always has done. It's physics. And a lot of our old power stations are closing, and a few more will close in the next few months. It means the UK is moving from quite a comfortable generation margin to, it is not a defined economic term, but it's one that Sir Alex Ferguson made famous, squeaky bum time in the electricity sector. Now this graph from Ofgem attempts to show that more eloquently. Those lines, don't worry about what they all mean, they're all showing a reduction in the supply margin. And most experts would worry at anything around 5%. And that's where I think 4 out of the 5 lines go. We are going to have a tight time. We need to build new stations, but that isn't happening because of all that uncertainty and rhetoric that I mentioned earlier. So what do I think should be built? Now the first issue is big or small. Now what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by small is this sort of stuff. Rooftop solar, dedicated biomass CHP plants. What I mean by large are the really big grid-connected power stations that are hundreds of megawatts in size. Now most policy and development efforts focus on the big stuff. And I'm sorry, I'm going to fall into the same trap. I'm going to talk about the big stuff, but there's a lot that can be done in the small stuff. I will briefly come back to that in a bit, because there's a lot of untapped potential at the small end. So, there are 4 basic choices of big stuff we could build. There's coal, there's gas, there's renewables or nuclear. Now, all of them have their fans, and there are probably fans of them in the room, but they all have issues. Now, I'm just going to look at the 2 issues, cost and carbon, and relate it to something that you should all know about, your electricity bill. The next few slides are based on a talk I gave to a group of sixth formers. And actually, I found it quite useful to do, so I'm repeating it. I actually have a group of sixth formers at the back there. Welcome. I think we're going to visit to Durham, so welcome. So hopefully you'll find this interesting. Now, your current domestic electricity bill is around £500 on average. Assumes you use 4,000 kilowatt hours if you're a bit of an anorak. Now, within that £500, the current, the generation element is around £250. That includes the cost of the black energy, the wholesale price, and a £30 premium for some renewable energy. You're paying about £250. Now I'm taking a pretty high level approach, rule of thumb numbers, but they paint a picture. You pay about £250. The other half is made up of network charges, all the social energy efficiency, supply costs and profit and tax. So, £250. And again, using that same high level approach, your electricity bill is responsible for around 2.5 million tonnes of carbon emissions every year. That's a combination of gas, coal, renewables, nuclear. On average, 2.5 million. So that's where we start. That's what's currently happening today. So we've got our 4 choices. We could decide, let's just build coal. So for the sake of illustration, what I'm showing is, if the entire system was coal, what would happen? Well, the good news is your bill would drop a bit, because coal's pretty cheap. Bad news, your carbon emissions will go up. Yet all the scientists are telling us they need to come down. But roughly you pay about £200, but you'd emit 4 tonnes. I don't think that's acceptable. And the reason why coal is cheap is because most countries are trying to reduce the amount of coal they burn. I actually think our old coal plants have a very useful role as the last resort power station, the one that runs for a few hours a year, where the carbon emissions doesn't matter, but it's cheaper to keep an old station open for longer than build a new one, just for that odd Tuesday evening when it's really cold, So that's what would happen if you did coal. If you did gas, your bill would actually stay about the same. You wouldn't be paying the renewables premium, but the gas needs a bit more money to make sure it gets built. So actually, there or thereabouts the same. And the carbon emissions drop from 2.5 million tonnes to 1.5. Looks good. And it's a good start. And that's why people talk about building gas plants. But the scientists say that 40% reduction in carbon, that's not going to be enough. Most of the experts and indeed stated policy in the UK says we need an 80% reduction in carbon. So this is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't get us the whole way. Okay? So we could all do renewables. And I'm using onshore wind as my example here, because I know the numbers. So if we built onshore wind, you'd pay, it's actually £380 there, it's now gone down to £360. £360 a year for 15 years, and then it'd be back to around what we pay now. So that's quite a premium. £130 a year extra for all renewables. But of course your carbon emissions have gone to zero. Now I think that's too much of a premium for people to pay. That's going to push more people into fuel poverty. So it sorts the carbon out, but it creates an affordability problem. And actually also the system would really struggle with that much renewables. But it's just to illustrate. Fourth choice, nuclear. Well, we have, the government in its infinite wisdom has agreed a price for nuclear. A mere £370 you pay every year for the next 35 years. And great, zero carbon emissions. Now, that's effectively 370 for 35 years is effectively more than 380 for 15 and then 250. So we pay more than for onshore wind. And no one has been able to tell me why the UK is paying between 50 and 100% more than other people are paying to build nuclear power stations. Haven't had an answer. I don't believe we should be subsidising nuclear technology. It's been around for 50, 60 years. There's more installed capacity in nuclear in the world than there is wind. We should have got it right. So we should wait until the nuclear industry can demonstrate it can build a time, budget and reasonable cost, and we as a country have a robust storage solution for the waste. So that's just taking each of the four and saying that's what it would be. Just looking at cost of carbon in your bill. Quite a simple way of doing it, and I've simplified a lot just to say that. So I mentioned Sir Alex Ferguson earlier, so I'll return to football and give you what I think my answer would be. 4-4-2. 20% from a combination of energy efficiency and distributed generation, the small stuff, the solar panels on the house, the energy efficiency. 40% from a variety of renewables, wind, marine, solar, biomass, and 40% from gas-fired generation. Now if you do the calculations, which you can sort of reverse engineer from the previous charts, that gets a similar bill to today, because effectively the savings from the energy efficiency are paying for the higher cost in renewables, very roughly, but it's half a tonne of carbon a year, an 80% reduction. So my answer there is, can we do without coal and nuclear in the long term? Yes, if we focus on the energy efficiency, getting the cost of renewables down and building gas. So that's my answer to that. I would say one thing, however, on gas. I think it will plug the gap. Gas stations are relatively easy to build, and there's a lot of gas in the world. However, it could lock us into too high a carbon route. So I would think we should invest in demonstrating carbon capture and storage as an insurance policy. So this is not about deploying it today, it's about being able to deploy it for 2030. So I would just do that as well. And so what I would end up saying is to EDF, thank you, but no thank you. Go and build your power station somewhere else, and when you've sorted it out, then we'll have a word with you. Now that answer does raise another issue, shale gas. Now that could and will and probably has had a separate lecture all on its own by experts in shale gas, and I am by no means an expert in shale gas. What I have seen through my role on the Wood Group board is how it's transformed the US energy landscape. And this is just a graph of showing you how that, and just look at that line. Before 2009, nothing much going on, and then that purple, nice platinum purple, seems appropriate for this place. That has how it's transformed, and it's transformed the economy over there. Plants are being built, chemical plants are being built. However, here in the UK, we've produced more papers and consultations than we have actually produced shale gas. So what does it mean for the UK? This is thought in progress. I've looked at the same three pressures that I mentioned earlier and said, just how does it all work? And conclusions I came to. Well, firstly, our reserves are more challenging. And there are people in this room who are far better able to explain geologically why that is the case. But our reserves are more challenging. It's more difficult for us to get there. And we don't have a culture of onshore drilling. There are more land-based drilling rigs in the US than the rest of the world put together. So it's going to be more of a challenge for us to get sorted out. Then if you look at the energy trilemma, security, supply and affordability and carbon, how does shale play in that? Gas production in the North Sea has been in decline for 13 years now. And 2004, we've been dependent on imports for our marginal gas. Most of the estimates I've seen of shale gas offset some of that decline, but they don't put us back into an export mode. So it will help. Absolutely it will help. But it won't be a transformation. It won't put us back to where we were in 2000 of being energy independent. So I still believe we will be a net importer of gas. Therefore, the price we pay will be determined by global forces of demand and supply. Our shale production is going to be pretty small in the light of that. So we're not going to disconnect from the market, which is what the US has managed to do. And our production will be small, so it won't change the global market much, if at all. If we lead and others follow, a global surge might reduce gas prices. It's interesting, after I come to that view, I find that actually George Osborne seems to be agreeing with me from the latest evidence he gave. It's not going to be a hit, it's not going to make prices go up. It may not make them go down though. And then you look at the carbon footprint. Well, the research says actually the carbon footprint of shale gas isn't much different than, say, LNG. LNG, liquefied natural gas, is gas that's produced in Algeria, frozen, shipped to the UK, unfrozen and used. Now the process of freezing and unfreezing obviously costs energy. So the footprint of shale gas production is a bit more carbon intensive than conventional gas, but about the same as LNG, which we're already using. So it doesn't really change the equation of gas is better than coal from a CO2 point of view, but not as good as renewables. So where do I get to? Well, shale can play a useful role, but it is not a silver bullet. It reinforces that gas-fired generation has a part to play, and it can and should peacefully coexist with energy efficiency, distributed generation and renewables. Now, if you may remember my structure from way back, I'm in the middle of a midlife crisis here, and I said there were 5 features. We've done 2, 3 more to go. These are a lot quicker. The third feature of the midlife crisis, digital. Digital technology is dramatically changing all industries. Almost every industry, and the energy industry is no different. But there's a lot we don't know. We don't know whether digital is smart meters or home automation. We don't know how real-time pricing will affect consumers, whether they'll want it, whether they'll be allowed to have it. We don't know what demand patterns will change as people have better information of what they got, and how the use of plug-in electric vehicles will change those patterns. And we don't know what the difference for going from an analog grid, which is what we really have now, to a smart grid. There's lots of things we don't know. And with the exponential change that is going on in digital, with doubling every 2 years, this is changing so fast that the regulations are out of date, the industry is struggling to keep up, and customers, people like you, have a habit of taking industries in completely unexpected directions. And I don't think our industry or our regulators and politicians know this. And therefore the industry is a bit like a rabbit in headlights. It doesn't know what to do. Classic feature of midlife crisis. And of course we've got bills going up. We get mud slung from both sides. We get unedifying debates. It's pretty clear that unit prices of energy are on a systemic upward trend and have been for the last 10 years and are likely to continue. Unit prices, mainly caused by decarbonisation. You saw from my simple graphs that low carbon energy is more expensive than high carbon energy. That's pushing unit prices up, and also we're having to replace assets, old assets. And a reasonable return on a lot of money recently is a higher number than a good return on a small number from 40 years ago. Unit prices are going up. We need more honesty about that, because I've been very clear, it's unit prices. What happens to your bill, your responsibility, because you control the amount of consumption you have. Nobody else. And yet we very much treat energy efficiency as a public good. But you control it. So we need a degree of honesty. But the problem is that there's so poor trust in the energy sector. I don't know whether you've heard of a balloon debate. In a balloon debate, you put 4 people in a balloon and you vote who to throw off. Imagine this balloon. There's a politician, there's a journalist, a banker, and an energy executive. Who would you throw out first? You'd vote for a crash. And the energy executive didn't used to be in that box, in that balloon. It used to be an estate agent. And we've replaced them as public enemy number, depends on what survey. This one shows public enemy number 1. There are other surveys, 2, 3. Yeah. We're right up there. That makes it very difficult for the industry to have an honest debate. And the industry has to take responsibility for its reputation. It has to work together better, and it has to reform its act. And others, commentators, politicians, need to give credit when credit is due, and criticism should be constructive. Energy needs to get off the front pages of the newspapers, back into the business pages, and that will be a big step forward. So, we're in a midlife crisis, so something better change. 5 things. We need a new political agreement on the philosophy underpinning our market design. Regulation our markets. Make your mind up. Then we need a construction of a balanced choice of generation plants supported by a measured approach to shale gas. We need freedom for you as customers to respond to digital, to allow you to disrupt the energy market. we need an honest debate about the bills, and we need a sustained campaign to rebuild trust. Why do we need all that? Because energy really matters. It's fundamental to our modern way of life. Security of supply really matters in a digital society. Because everything you do is connected, and that connection needs power. Economic prosperity is linked to energy prices. You see what happens in the US when energy prices go down, the economy grows faster. The energy industry is an important employer. And the thing about the energy industry, unlike many others, it employs people all over the country. SSE, the company I was in charge of, had people employed from Lerwick on the Shetland Islands, and you cannot get any further north in the UK than Lerwick and the Shetland Islands, down to Bodmin in Cornwall. We had people on Stornoway in Dover. And there aren't many companies that can employ that many people throughout the country. And how we produce energy directly affects the environment. The energy industry, in its various formats, heat transport and electricity, is a large emitter of carbon and has other environmental impacts. We have to get the industry right because it really matters. And it's brought home to you how energy really matters when there isn't any energy. And I'll give you 2 examples of that to finish. The first is you go to an African village that is not connected to the grid, and 500 million people in Africa do not have mains electricity. They are dependent on kerosene lamps. If you live in a hut lit by kerosene, that is like living in a single room, passively smoking 40 cigarettes a day. That's what the absence of good quality energy is like. 1/3 of all hospital emissions in Kenya are burns from kerosene lamps. And then you go to Aaron, get my islands right, who lost power for 5 days. Unusually, the transmission line went down in a major storm 15 months ago. So the whole island, no electricity for 5 days. And just great stories of community spirit, but it really, really shook the whole island up. And the nice thing for me, that was part of my SSE story, is saved by a company called Agreco, who scoured the whole of the UK for temporary generation and took them up there, and I've now joined the board of Agreco. So it was interesting visiting Aaron a few weeks after this, and people still talking about the days the lights went out. Your lives are completely dependent on energy. Everything you do is dependent on energy. Embedded energy in what you use, what you buy, energy behind what you eat, and electricity to power and light all your gadgets in your home, and transport for how you're getting around. We have to get this right. And the energy industry has been really good to me over the last 25 years, and I care about it. And there are some real challenges, but they're solvable, because the best form of energy, the ultimate renewable energy, is human ingenuity. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we can open it up to questions now for Ian, and encourage the school visitors to also ask questions at the back of the room there. So, questions, please. I'll go with the gentleman with the shirt on, the red shirt.
Just be a gentleman without shirts here.
Red shirt, white shirt.
Rest of the So I'm gonna. Oh yeah.
Please let us know where you're from, whether you're from the university or outside, or.
Do I have to shout into it or?
I'm a student at the university, and I'm 22 years old, so I don't have as much experience as most of the rest of the room, I don't think. And when I turn on Radio 4 and I listen to the debates around energy, what I hear is I hear people from your generation, what I consider wasting airtime all the time about energy. They have constant debates about shale gas, whether it's a good idea, whether it's going to fix everything. But in your talk I see that I think there are much more pressing issues and much more important, bigger changes to the industry that need to happen. I hear them wasting time about arguing about whether climate change is happening when it is. My question to you is, if you were a broadcaster and you're going to put together a panel for a radio show, who would you have on your panel?
The problem that I hate journalists. So we'll just take it. The problem that even the responsible end of the media, they feel they need to give balance. So if the debate on climate change, I think that's 99-1 in the cycle, we should, it's between 95 and 99%. They can't have a panel of 4 people, all of one voice. So they have to put somebody. So the best you'll get there is 3-1. And the 1 will have a disproportionate airtime, but they will throw controversy in. And generally, it's easier to be in opposition than in favour. So that is the problem, and that's why when you listen to Radio 4 or you watch Question Time, you think, what's going on here? There's just a waste. They're trying to create controversy in the debate. If you get, and I've had this experience as well, you get a politician, you've heard them speak in the morning on the Today programme, you then have a meeting with them an hour and a half later, and you think, you're saying completely different things than you said on the radio this morning, because that was all one audience and stirring up. And that I recognise it, we've got to compromise, we've got to move forward and make some action. So the answer would be, who would I put on the panel? I would put 4 22-year-olds and say, I'd have someone like me as the presenter say, but practically in the world, how are you going to get to that point? There's a big chance. So you're on the panel, and I'm sure I'll find a few other people here. Because actually the role that people like you have is to say to people like me, stop telling us there are problems and get on and sort it.
Okay, question here, green jumper.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Ian, that was great. Roswell, Community Energy England, that's the hat I'm wearing today anyway. You sort of skipped community energy, but that doesn't really matter. The question is, given that the community energy strategy is looking very closely at joint partnership type approaches with commercial enterprises, what's your view on that? How will it really happen? They're also looking at increased community benefits, which is another side I want to be fairly focused.
Okay, at least I apologise for stopping it. I did mention about the small scale that I really do want to play, and communities being a part of that. I really do believe that they have a problem. Partly because they're connected back to energy, and the problem with the big power stations is we totally connection away from energy. However, the answer to your question is a very difficult one. What happens is the large commercial organisations don't trust the community because A, they're a bunch of flaky people who don't know what they're doing and can't be trusted, and the community doesn't trust the big company because A, they're a bunch of flaky people who just want to control it and do it their way. So there's a lack of trust on both sides. And it takes time. I managed in my time to basically get one community energy project or scheme of project involved. And that took 18 months of perseverance on the part of 3 people in Bath and 3 people in SSE. So said, we will make this happen. And we really struggled with it. If we hadn't been, those 6 people, of which I was one, had not been committed, it wouldn't have happened. So, forget what's on the words of the paper, it's actually about people. And it's people on both sides building trust with each other and saying, we can work together on this.
Janusz.
Thank you. Janusz Galek, Durham University. So I'd like to come back to the most important question, which is how to keep the lights on. I mean, those graphs are all showing that the generation margins are going down. People are not building power stations. Electricity market reform is not going to kick in until sometime. The capacity mechanism will not work. But we'll have a crisis around the corner. So what could or should be done? What is there any role for the government? Should they build power stations? How to avoid a rolling blackout? Because that would be total disaster.
If there are any energy students here who is lecturers who we told you should be here, because you might ask exam questions on it, I apologise. I didn't ask them to do that. Firstly, is keeping us, the reality is that the chances are if we get sweet bomb time, it won't be rolling blackouts, it will be higher prices that will force industry to disconnect and make an economic choice to avoid it. We're not so badly off that we're going to be in rolling blackout. So the media, back to the sensationalist, it's very blackout. It's not going to be as bad as that, but things will be tight and will price very highly. So government have left it too late for conventional markets to deliver solutions. Because we need this capacity. Frankly, we need it this winter, but we've been bailed out because it's been very mild and very windy. I mean, demand this year, which was 4 to 5% lower than it was last year, and last year was a sort of normal year. If this winter had been cold, 10% higher. And typically, when it's colder, it's less windy. So we've been okay. We've survived this year, so we do need it for next year. You go then into specially designed instruments, contracts, to do one of 2 things. You either bring back mothballed plant, and you basically pay them to re-bring it back, or you put temporary generation in. And there is a market, there are one of which I'm on the board of the record, a company called APR, that specialise in providing temporary power. And they'll do 200 megawatts in Mozambique, and they'll do Libya and all that sort of thing. I know they're both starting to look at Europe to say, actually, the developer might need that temporary power too. So I think we're ending up saying, we've got to get ourselves over the next couple of years with specialist contracts and get a fix for the sort of 3 to 5 year horizon. And I was more talking about the 3 to 5 year horizon.
Gentleman blue tie, and then Jenny at the front here. Okay, do you want to? Yeah. So the gentleman blue tie, you just go back one more, that's it.
In 1948, when the industry was first nationalised, there was a law made in Parliament called the obligation to supply. When you were reprivatised, just recently in 1990 or something like that, that law was got rid of. Do you think that was a mistake? Because do you not think that had that law still been in place, there would be more trust in the industry?
Okay, and over to Jenny's question.
Yes, Sam.
And
Right, Sam's
we'll talk about
thank you. It sort of follows on Jenny Saunders from NEA. I mean, you painted a really colourful picture of the industry growing up. They were playing, you were dating, you were marrying, you were divorcing, having a midlife crisis, and all the symptoms of self-obsession. All through that time, I was also alongside the industry, seeing that at times you ignored the customers or you took them for granted. Now, you run a responsible company. I'm not accusing you of that, sorry, but it's brought us to a point where people think that the industry now sweated the assets, it's not investing, it's not going to invest, you want too much certainty. Perhaps it is time for back to full regulation. People want price freezes, they want certainty. How is the industry really going to persuade us that you can deliver?
Sort of related questions. I thought that the people in the back, when you said privatised recently in 91, looked quite familiar, because none of them were born there. The question's still valid. Yes, that obligation to supply was removed. And it's quite interesting, I was asked that question quite often, that variance of that question quite often in SSE. One of which my answers was, SSE had a generation business or a customer business or an equity business. The smart size of a small country. So I felt that obligation to supply quite deeply. And I was really concerned. But the problem was it wasn't a clear articulation, and I think there was a misstep there. I don't know how you could go in the fragmented industry that we're creating, which had other benefits, but one of the problems is, and that's still the case, and it was quite interesting to hear David Cameron being asked effectively that question in one of the select committees, and he said, I look National Grid in the eye, and they assured me that I would go out this winter. So he effectively, politically put that on National Grid, and that's largely what's been happening in the last 2 years. These temporary contracts I was referring to will be led by National Grid. So we've ended up creating a sort of proxy obligation on the grid. I'm not sure that's fair. I don't know whether that's all we want to do it. And I think we probably did. We should have been more clearer in 91 as to where that obligation sat. And that was probably partly then leads to some of the problems that Jenny's talking about. In the teenage years, we absolutely forgot customers. Boards of directors, and I was an advisor board and then on a board in that one, were worried about M&A. They were talking to bankers. They were about their share price. Some less scrupulous boards were worried about their share options. And they weren't focusing on customers. And we got into bad habits in that period. And so we weren't in a good place with our customers when the pressures hit the industry. And we had no credit to use up. And therefore the crisis of trust that's happened in the last 2 years is as a consequence of that. So I laid out 2 scenarios, regulation and markets. I didn't actually say what I thought was the answer. You were forcing me to do that. I actually fundamentally believe in markets. They are the right long-term solution for resource allocation, things like that. I think for the transition we're in now, and given the legacy of the past, we should regulate. We should regulate generation supply, probably for 5 to 10 years, to get the industry the change to decarbonisation on the right track, to restore trust. But that proper regulation is not a price freeze, it's regulated prices, which adjust according to costs, and profit margins that are regulated, fair and transparent and seen to. So I actually, of my 2 scenarios, I would go to regulation first, which means a different structure, regulatory structure than we currently have, more like the energy agency than Ofgem, sort the issues out over a 5 to 10 year period, build what we need to build, set, and then start rolling back the regulation when time allows. Now that is not the view that I had maybe 2 years ago. That is a reflection of probably the last 3 questions, the lack of trust through where security supplies, the pressing need to do things and a lack of trust.
Okay, gentleman with white t-shirt, second from the back. So, second from the
And
back.
then maybe take one from up there with the other mic.
Yeah, Sam, can you go up there to the gentleman with the green, and the lady next door to him?
We'll do the 3 then.
Yeah, do 3, 2 up there, Sam. And
One right.
there's one with the white t-shirt who's got a microphone. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Can an industry based on projects ever move towards solving the major problems that you've outlined?
Okay. That's a simple one. Yes. Because, fundamentally I believe in markets. And why food is actually more important to your life than energy. The whole food system is incredibly based on profit margin. And it works. Because you can read this and I have hundreds of choices of what you eat and where you eat. So yes, it does. However, at times markets really struggle. And that's why I think at this stage, you still need the profit incentive to get the right behaviours, but you need regulation to build trust.
Yeah.
I'm a chemistry student at the university and quite interested in how I can personally make an impact on the future of the energy industry. And so there's several things that I'm thinking about here. There's the fact that you were talking about potential sources of energy for our future. So you're talking about gas, preference over that, over carbon, for instance. But where do you think research in general could come into play? What's your view of the potential for research to impact on the balance between all of the different sources of energy that we could use? And what's the government's view on research as well? And could you say a bit more about the fact that you're a professor?
Okay, right. When I was an undergraduate, some of my friends were doing chemistry, and they seemed to spend all their time in either the labs or the arts. I think there is a role. There's a role for most of the sciences in energy. Take chemistry as an example. I think there's a lot of interesting work going on the chemistry of biomass and how we can maybe use gene therapy to change algae that absorb CO2. Because they're much better on carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and reuse. And I think that's where the chemistry and the chemical engineering of how do we change that whole equation is. And there's more going on in research in energy in the last 5 years than there was in the previous 20. And I was at a dinner last night in Edinburgh, run by the Technology Strategy Board, which is the UK government funder of research, looking at a system, energy systems piece of work. We tend to spend a lot of time thinking about small bits, but it's a system. And how we model and behaviours and how the energy system will change, looking into the link between heat and transport. So there is more research going on in energy than any time I know. And so for the undergraduate people who have an interest in energy, it's a fascinating industry because it matters. It's a physical industry, it's a political industry, but it's an industry facing change in generation, in networks, and in the customer side.
Hi, I'm a physics and maths undergraduate.
Maths.
Maths and physics, yeah. But I'm interested a bit about the distribution of energy generation across the country, particularly given that Scotland has disproportionately high capacity compared to its population for renewables like hydroelectric and wind power.
Scotland has got a lot of renewables. I live there. It is wet and windy. It's not a surprise that Scotland has a lot. It's doing what usually it is. If there are any economic students here, theory of comparative advantage, that's exactly what you Scotland expect Scotland to do. That's the easy bit of your question. I'm going to duck to the second one because I don't know the answer. I intend to do some thinking around that subject. It is like many of the other areas of it, the independent bank, currency, EU membership, defence. It's not clear. It could be good, it could be bad. There are issues that need to be thought through, and I need to do that. I'm actually doing a lecture in Scotland where I have to address that. I've sort of on 6 weeks.
Christopher Buttons at you briefly talked about the energy being treated like a public good where consumption doesn't affect others. How are you going to get the market to respect it as being a human good where consumption is causing social costs, both socially and environmentally, but allowing consumers to pay the costs?
I mean, I think I mentioned that the price, the absence of the price of carbon, with a fundamental, I mean, Nick Stern described as the biggest market failure of all time. We know we haven't properly priced the externalities, and we need to properly price carbon, and we aren't. I mean, the EU had a value attempt that has failed miserably, and part of the problem is that most of the interventions that we now have in the UK are trying to correct the deficiency that we have with the price of carbon. If we did, and properly internalise that price income, then the markets will properly function and deliver cost-effective pricing to consumers. For instance, presently, it's the last unit of energy you use, which you waste, and I would venture to suggest everybody in this room wastes the last unit of energy they use. But that last unit is also the cheapest, because effectively you're paying a fixed price and then a variable price. But actually it's the one that causes the most damage. So we need to change the way that energy is priced so that the most wasteful is the most expensive. That means either carbon pricing and pricing in other externalities. So that's why I believe in markets to get that right. But we have to start proxying it through regulation initially.
Jeff?
Ian, excellent presentation, which generates a cornucopia of questions, which I could ask, but I'll only concentrate on 3. One, why are you so pessimistic about energy efficiency, when really, in reality, we should be targeting 35 to 40% reductions by 2030, and these are probably realistic targets. 2, in terms of renewable energy, the impact of charge storage being one of the big impacts on the uptake of renewable energy and the cost of large charge storage systems. What were your thoughts on the impacts of charge storage on the uptake of renewable energy at a much greater level? And 3, carbon capture storage. And the cost of carbon capture storage, because it has actually no value to the end user other than a CO2 reduction. What do you believe the impact on the cost of carbon capture storage will have on individual domestic energy bills?
Okay, really good question. I'm not pessimistic on energy efficiency, I'm realistic. The fact is that it's a private good. Saving energy reduces your bill. Get on and do it. But you don't. Now you should be rational. The reason you don't insulate your loft is because of all the clutter you've got in the loft. You don't want to take it all down and put it all back. Because the cost is greater than the saving. So I'm just realistic that we have been attempting to subsidise a private good for 30 years and people still don't do it. So I'm realistic about what I think can be achieved. Firstly. Secondly, storage, I think, is one of the, back to the question for the young guy earlier, storage is a key area of research. research, we haven't really cracked storage, because the electricity system has worked on the surface of basis. We'll have to do the supply of energy to meet the demand. So whenever you switch the light on, a power station will fire up, roughly. That's crazy, because it costs money to turn the power station on and off the cycle, and we have too much demand sometimes to do this. So we have storage moving that energy between half hours, days, and even months, but we never really invested in the research, the development of deployment storage. Now, there's a lot going on there, but more needs to be done. So it's the biggest single prize. And I'm going to duck the third question because I forgot what it was.
CCS.
CCS. It's about an insurance policy for how low can we get the cost of carbon. So at this stage, it should be run by general taxation, because it's a classic public good. Can we prove that it should be paid for by electricity consumers at this stage? Is can we reduce the cost of decarbonisation in 2030 by developing that technology?
You compared the markets to going to buy food and so on, and I've seen this when you go to Sainsbury's, you can buy energy, or Marks and Spencer's. I don't really want to be buying my energy when I'm shopping, and I think it's similar to when I go and buy products. I exactly know what's in my fridge or what I'm going to make. Most people don't know much about their energy use or their bills or how many kilowatts. I mean, I work in the energy field and I've got this information, so I might be a bit of a geek and I calculate my energy use. So I think that's a very important aspect of it. Should energy be deregulated to that level? And the other point, as long as you've got PLCs running the business who are making profits at the end and shareholders, how can you tie that with energy efficiency? Should we be moving more to a Scandinavian type of model where energy is accepted as a kind of a secure supply and people are prepared to pay a high premium for it, but it's there?
Two questions. You're absolutely right. People don't understand how much energy they use. Partly because a lot of bills are estimated. So we forget, even if you try, it's actually not that easy to find out how much. And there isn't people struggle to make a connection because of the light switch on their electricity bill. There is a direct connection, but it takes, people don't know the cost. How much does it cost in energy to boil a kettle? People don't know that. So and that's why I think digital will have a transforming effect. Because I think in 10 years' time, you will know that. Now, maybe not smart metering, but I mean digital. And you'll be able to make much more informed decisions in a way that you can't now. So I think that's where the digital area plays. On the example of the profit margin and energy efficiency, well, as a single company, my answer to that was, if I can persuade you to use less energy but switch to me, I make more money. I make money per customer, not per unit sold per customer. So if I can have a better offering, then that's good. But that doesn't work at a market level. And I accept there is that. It's like when you see the advert from Diageo saying, buy Johnny Walker, but drink responsibly, you go, what's going on there? It's a bit the same in energy. And it is a problem, which is why I think that the politicians have shied away from the message of your energy bill, take control of it. It's not up to the energy company whether you install it, insulate it off. It's your lot, it's your bill. Get on and do it. And they're frightened. You get this crazy debate that happened in November, where David Cameron's press officer spends most of the weekend denying that the Prime Minister had said wear a jumper. But actually, he should have said, if you're cold, wear a jumper. But he didn't, he tried to deny it. He hadn't said it, he had to deny it. But actually take control of your energy. And the problem is, it's been up to the companies to do it, and that gets quite a mixed message.
Okay, there's 3 more questions coming, and then we'll have to draw it to a halt, okay, because I think we'll be well over time. So first is the gentleman at the back, and then Rob at the front, and then Tom lastly. Okay, okay, gentleman at the back.
My name is Harold Amita from Page Center School of Engineering. I've got 2 questions for you. So the first one is regarding security of supply in the UK. And you talked about 4.2, so you talked about gas, energy efficiency, and renewables. I just wanted to know your thoughts on interconnections within Europe, some interconnected grid. What do you think of that? And the second thing question I had was regarding the spotlight on the electricity industry. For instance, in America, I think between 20 to 30% of energy consumption is electricity, and the rest is in heating of domestic, industrial, commercial buildings. You've got a lot of energy consumption in the aviation industry and maritime as well. But there seems to be a spotlight on electricity. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that as well. Thank you.
All right. Rob? Yeah.
Rob Williams from BT. Government clamouring for change in the energy markets, and so is the media. Disruptive technologies are all seen as something that's really going to drive change and perhaps change the status quo. People are clamouring for that change at the moment. So just what do you think are the 3 key disruptive technologies in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to give a positive outcome for the consumer?
Okay. And the last question.
Yeah, Tom.
A slightly pessimistic question. I think we were possibly optimistic about domestic behavioural efficiencies and integration in light of the devastating impact of general economy, jobs, salaries and house prices, mean that increasingly it's not your, it's your landlord's fault. And the incentive in rented households to invest capital for efficiency, even at the level of replacing the incandescent bulbs, seems to be much, much weaker.
Okay. Right. Deal with that one. I would deal with that with building standards. Because I think you're absolutely right. The renting market, there are split incentives and nothing happens. I think you have to impose ever-tightening standards on rentals. So you drive that behaviour in the right direction. So that's a regulated solution to that. Interconnection is good, but from a domestic security supply point of view, imagine it's extremely cold across Europe. France and like their electrons very quick if we need them, but they need to. And that's the dilemma with interconnecting. It's good, it increases security supply, but when it's really tight, can you rely on it? So that's a good one. Yeah, the second question was?
Spotlight on just the electricity.
Oh, the electricity. You're absolutely right, because the electricity bill, I'm going to use the example of £500. You pay about £750 for your gas bill. Actually, and that's the one you can have most impact on, because you can insulate your loft, be it your loft or ladders, and it has most impact on your gas bill. If you insulate your loft, change your, if you've got a 10-year-old boiler, you replace your boiler, and you set your thermostat for maybe 1 degree lower than you currently have it, you'll save about 40% of your gas bill. So we focus a lot on electricity. Actually, we should be focused on how much you've got more heat. And then we can talk about your transport energy and your miles per gallon in your car and all that. And that's again another whole debate of transport energy. Left the last question last is sort of in one sense the most optimistic question as opposed to the pessimistic question. 3 disruptive technologies. I think energy storage in its various forms will disrupt how the generation market operates. Because rather than having to have the generation to meet demand like that, we'll be able to get the most efficient generation onto the system, generate what is most efficient to do, and store it when you deploy it. That's the first thing. The second thing is smart grids, and I mean smart distribution grids that act smartly to maintain multiple sources of generation, multiple demands, and manage them probably over the dumb analog system. And the third is home automation, the smart home, if you like. The best app I have on my phone, if I haven't switched it off, I'll show you, is the one that I can turn my central heating in Edinburgh on or off from my phone. And within 5 years, you'll all be able to do that. So those are the three disruptive technologies, one in each area of the business, that I actually think can fundamentally change this industry.
Fantastic. I'm going to hand over to Ian Marchant, who's chair of our advisory board and the Energy Leadership Council in the North East England, to give a vote of thanks.
Ian, that was truly wonderful. I was fascinated by all that you said. I take issue with the first word at the top of your slide, mine. Energy really matters. Electricity really matters in my view, because without electricity we would die very quickly, both commercially, physically, and in every other form. Nobody, I don't think, other than those I've been involved with the electricity industry for the last 40 odd years, realise just how important that is. Food in supermarkets, refrigeration, and so on, and I could go on a long time. Three things came out in your presentation, your lecture, which stuck in my mind or chime. One was customer behaviour. And speaking as chair of the advisory board at DEI, customer behaviour is integral in one of the major projects that we're involved with here at Durham University at the moment, the customer-led network revolution, in other words. The other point that you mentioned was this political consensus. And I wonder whether some of the free spirits, as you now are, like you, could get together and really start to put pressure on the politicians and just try and guide them. Because to me, ever since the PIU report back in '92, 12 years ago, when we first started to seriously look at energy and electricity in particular in this country, there's not a lot useful being done. We've had God knows how many mountains of paper. The EMR consultation was another 500 pages of paper to read if you wish to get involved in that. So political concord, I think, is important, and you, as one of the free spirits of the energy industry now, I think could corral a group who might just say some words of wisdom which politicians A, would understand, and B, react to. The last thing was trust in energy companies, and that is pretty poor. And I think you and all of your colleagues at the senior levels in the industry have a lot to do to restore that trust back to consumers. One thing you didn't mention, and I'm intrigued as to why not, you don't need to answer it now, and that is offshore wind. Thank you. So, on behalf of everybody here, and on behalf of Durham Energy Institute, Durham University, I'd like to thank you for a most stimulating and fascinating presentation. I'm very pleased that we could have recorded visually and orally. And last but certainly not least, the hard work of the staff who all played their part in creating